You are listening to the One Day at a Time podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friends, this is Arlena. Welcome to the podcast. We all know someone who is in denial, right? So can you break them out of denial? Today, my guest Amber Hollingsworth and I talk about what to do if someone you love is in denial and the roles you might be playing that's keeping them stuck. Amber is an addictions counselor with over 20 years of experience. She is also the host of Put the Shovel Down, a YouTube channel with nearly 750,000 subscribers. That is huge. You'll see in this conversation that she has a gift for putting herself in other people's shoes and really understanding how people in recovery think and feel. We talk about what to do if you're trying to get sober and your spouse still wants to drink, how to build trust and credibility so they listen to you, and hard truths about what is required to get results. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Amber. Amber, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I always love talking to you.
I know. I loved our first conversation so much. I mean, you just have a way of, what I really appreciate about what you do is that you meet people where they're at, right? I feel like when we're getting sober, when we have family members that are in trouble, we all have the same questions. And so it's important to meet people where they're at so that you can walk them through the rest of the thought process and the mindset of, healthy living, whether it's, sobriety or, what do we call the other people? I'm always in this camp of the alcoholic and the addict, so it's hard for me to put my mindset in the role of other people. But I feel like most people that are in recovery have another person in their life who is, falls into the alcoholic addict camp, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just so prevalent. It's everywhere. I think everyone is impacted by it, for sure.
Yeah. And so today, you had this amazing video about, helping somebody break the denial, a high functioning person break denial. And I think high functioning people actually have it harder because they don't have the consequences. So I would love to, I'm going to leave the link to the video that you have on YouTube in the show notes. But I thought it would be helpful to talk about how to break somebody out of denial. I think as somebody who struggles with denial on occasion, don't we all struggle with
Don't
denial?
we all? Yeah, I'm the master. I like to say, if you've done something bad, come tell me about it. I'll tell you how it's not that bad. I'm the best. Rationalizing. Yeah.
Rationalize, justify. Yeah, I love
Mm-hmm.
that.
It's like a superpower.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some survival skills that translate and some that don't.
Right. Yeah.
But let's start with you said something that I thought was really contrary and not like obvious, but why is being in denial not necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I think it is important to remember that being in denial, two things about it, I guess. The first is being in denial is a protective mechanism. And I think it's important to remember that it's there for a reason. It means someone's not ready to see something, and you can't just go rip the curtain down, which is, it's what we want to do. It's what I want to, it's an instinct, and it's hard to understand. Like, how can this person not see it? And can't we just speed this up? And it's so obvious, but it doesn't really work that way. The harder you try to rip the curtain down, the longer it lasts. So that's one thing to remember about denial. The other reason why I think it's not always a bad thing is, to me, denial is fixable, right? And denial, it cures itself eventually. There are things you can do to speed it up, which is a lot of what I talk about on my channel and stuff. But it eventually people figure that out because the unmanageability just becomes so obvious. And I find it's much more difficult to deal with someone who's so far in that they fully realize they have a problem. In fact, they may think they have the worst problem ever, and they've given up hope of getting better. To me, that's a much more difficult situation to deal with than someone in denial. Someone in denial means they don't want to have this problem. which is a good thing, right? And they're not resigned to having this problem, which is another good thing. So I feel like there's a lot to work with there when you look at it through that lens. It's just about how do we get someone to see this in a way that doesn't make them feel hopeless or run away screaming.
Yeah, I feel like denial, like you said, denial is a protection because I think it once we face the truth, it can kick off like a shame spiral.
Yes.
And once that spiral kicks off, I think the temptation is that we're always going to feel that way.
Right. I mean, it's just hard to look at certain things, and not only is it hard to see things about ourselves that make us feel shameful, but it also means we're going to have to make some big decisions that we maybe don't want to make, and make some changes that we're not ready to face. And so there's a lot of reasons for denial to be there, right? And there are ways of helping someone to sort of roll their own curtain down, I guess you will, you know.
Right, right.
Mhm.
I find that if we can create a place of safety, and this is not necessarily the family member, sometimes it happens outside of the family, that if we can find some compassionate support from people that we don't have a lot of history with, like if they can create safety, that actually releases some denial. But I'm curious, a lot of what you talked about in the video was kind of confrontational to the person living with the addict or someone in active addiction, because you're really saying, hey, you play a part in allowing this person to stay in denial. So can you talk a little bit about, like, if you have somebody in your life who is in denial about their drinking or using, what role do they play?
What role does the family member play in maybe helping the
Yeah.
person stay in denial? I think you can do that in a couple of ways. Um, One way is that most of the time, if you're like a loved one of someone who has an addiction, our instinct tells us to try to fix the person's problems because we don't really want them to suffer. And we definitely don't want them to have consequences that are going to be like forever long term, like going to jail or something, huge. So we fix the problems externally that they're creating, but we're angry at them in the relationship. So we're constantly harping on them, and we're mad at them, and we're resentful, and we're nagging them, and we're fixing the external problems. So it gives the wrong impression. If you step back from that and get this, 20,000 yards away look, you can obviously see what this person is seeing is that you're the problem, right? Their life's functioning fine. They're going to work, they're doing all these things, they have a relationship with their kids, all these things, which probably you may be doing a lot of holding that together for them.
Right.
And they don't see that. They see that my life's fine. My grades are okay. I got a job. I get a paycheck.
Yeah.
But what they do see as the problem is that you're always on their case and you're always negative and critical. So they're looking at the wrong problem. So I feel like
Right.
that's probably the biggest thing that we do to contribute to keeping someone in denial. And that's not me saying it's your fault. It's not me saying it's your fault that they have an addiction. I'm just saying you do have influence in both
Right.
directions over any relationship that you're in. And you have some influence, some cards that you can play in the regards of denial.
Yeah, I always say that we can't control people, but we do have influence. You're right.
Right.
What are some of the ways that people are contributing to someone's denial? Like you talk a little bit about, nagging people to like get up for work. Like if someone's hungover, you nag them to get up so they go to work on time. And I feel like the fear is if I don't do that, then they don't go to work and then they're going to get fired and it impacts us financially. So
Right.
what are some of the ways that what are some of the ways that people try to control, or like reasons why people try to control?
Well, I think you bring up a really good point in that a lot of times the consequences for the addicted person, those consequences also fall on you if you're especially a close family member or even a friend. It's not just that it affects them. If it was just that it affects them, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be easier, especially if this person is your partner, your spouse. And if they lose their job, maybe they're the primary, income earner. And if they lose their job, it affects everybody. If they go to jail, it affects everybody. If you divorce them, it affects you, it affects your kids, so it's not just as easy, as saying, well, let them, you know, what's the saying? sow their reap what they
Reap what
sow.
they
What does
sow.
that say? Reap
Yeah.
what they sow. It's not
Yeah.
just that easy because
Right.
it's we all reap what they're sowing, right? And so it's hard to let go of some of those consequences. But the ones that you can let go of, it's going to help the person see the unmanageability that's in their life. If you're holding everything together, if you're keeping the kids together, if you're keeping the house together, if you're making sure the bills get paid, if you're making sure they're always getting to work, if you've hired 10 lawyers for 10 DUIs, you're giving them the impression that it's okay, it's fine. Like, you see this really, especially when it comes, like, parents and young, not young kids, but, like, young adults or even adults. It's like the parent is on them about going to class, and did you turn this in, and did you get up, and the person, the young adult's looking at their grades or whatever it is, and they're like, "I'm fine," like, "Okay, I made some C's. What's your problem? I'm passing." But the parent knows, "Well, only reason you're passing is because 'cause I'm on your case because I helped you write half that paper," because, and
Right.
so you're giving them the wrong idea as far as, like, is this impacting your life? And not only that, but because you're holding all those pieces together for them, you're feeling super resentful and angry naturally because you're doing way more than your fair share of the responsibilities. And so that starts to ooze out of you in every interaction, in what you say, just in your energy, just comes out of your pores. And they pick up on that. And then that creates more defensiveness. And the person gets so caught up in defending themselves that it's a distraction from seeing the real picture.
Yeah. It's almost like we create what we defend against type of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people trying to get sober this time of year, and maybe your spouse, like I'm really thinking a lot about like how do you sort of survive the beginning part of sobriety for yourself when your spouse isn't really like if they're in denial about their own drinking, how does somebody, get sober in that sort of situation? What recommendations do you have for that person?
So are you talking about like the situation where maybe both people, maybe it's a couple, both people are drinking or using or whatever, and then one person's trying to get sober and one isn't?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's really hard.
Yeah.
In my experience with that, if you have a substance abuse problem, your spouse wants you to fix that so badly, they're willing to stop, give up anything, unless they also have a problem.
Right.
So in my experience, when the spouse or the family member is just adamantly refuses to change anything, it's like, not only am I gonna keep drinking or whatever, but I'm gonna keep it in the house. I'm gonna do this. And you know what? You could get it if you want it. They have this attitude about it, which I guess there's some truth in that. You could get it if you want it. We can come back to that, but that's not the whole truth.
What do
Um,
you mean you can get it if you want it, like
well, like a
sobriety?
lot of times, the defense that the family member will say was, if they can use it if they want to, they can get alcohol. They could get it anywhere. So why should I change?
Yeah.
It is kind of a defensive statement that you hear a lot, and my response to that is yes, that is true. They could go get that anywhere at any time. They could be in prison and get it. You're so right. But I feel like in your home should be your safe place where you don't have to fight it tooth and nail 24/7 and have this constant ongoing argument in your head. Should I, shouldn't I? They're gone 5 minutes. How long before they get back? All this stuff that we're doing, this whole conversation argument we're having with ourselves. If we can't even just relax in our own home because we're fighting it because we know it's where the secret stash is or it's in the fridge or wherever, you eventually run out of willpower, no matter how much you mean it, and you eventually fall when you're fighting that temptation 24/7 like that. So, could they go out and get it? Sure, of course they could, but when you're keeping it that easy and that close, it's just it's like it's talking to them, it's calling to them that they're having to actively resist all the time, and I feel like it's a bad situation. It's not a good.
I can't imagine like when I was first getting sober, I hadn't drank for a while, but I was still smoking a lot of weed. Like that was I was on back in the day, they called it the marijuana maintenance
Oh,
program.
yeah.
I think now they just call it like harm reduction. But I cannot imagine and alcohol is everywhere. I got used to that, but I wasn't used to having other things in my
Mhm.
environment. And I just think it would be so hard to try to get sober when it's in the house. Like I had to totally clean out my environment. I couldn't be around anybody who was doing it. So I just think it would be really hard for somebody try to get sober when their spouse is still using and keeping it in the house.
Yeah. So I found that when the family member that adamantly hangs on to, I'm not going to change any of my behaviors. I hate to say it, but it's usually an indicator that something's going on with them, because normally the parent, the spouse, whoever it is so desperate to help you get better. I mean, a lot of times they gave it up 2 years ago trying to be a role model for you or whatever, like,
Yeah.
they go overboard. They, make it almost awkwardly weird, but that's that's the
Yeah.
typical reaction. But when someone's like, "I'm not changing," that's their problem. I think it means that maybe you're not that far behind. Right? Might not be
Yeah,
the
that
answer people
brings
wanna hear, but I think it's
yeah,
something
that kind of
true.
circles back to being in denial again, right?
Right.
And so the antidote to that would be to allow them to start facing the consequences of their own choices. Is that right?
Right, but I guess it gets complicated if you're in early recovery and you have someone else who maybe they're in denial, maybe you're a few steps ahead of them as far as figuring this out. What the answer is as far as getting them out of denial is the same as I would teach any family member, the same formula.
Right.
But it gets complicated because you have to now also balance in, are you putting your own recovery in jeopardy? And how close to that line can you get? And do you have to back up to protect your own sobriety or recovery before you can try to figure out how to help this person get out of denial?
Yeah. You mentioned a formula that you
Mhm.
give. What is that formula?
For me, the formula is allowing the natural consequences, not punishment, not the consequences that you come up with as a family member, but the ones
Okay.
the world puts in place, right? And if that can be confusing sometimes, so I like to give this example, like if your kid is making bad grades, the consequence is the bad grade, or that they had to take the class again. It's not that they got on restrictions or that they lost their Xbox or you took the keys to their car. That's a punishment. So
Um,
the natural consequences are the ones that just happen, you don't interfere with. The problem is that when you put a consequence in place, it really is more of a punishment, and then the person really just feels like, again, you're the problem, you're the villain. So, as much as possible, let the world put the consequences in place. And that you, on the other hand, as much as possible, you play the good guy, the listener, empathetic, you have good, like active listening skills. This will help the person to figure it out more because it's creating the unmanageability outside, which makes the picture obvious, and the safety inside the relationship to acknowledge what is happening. To me, that's the formula. Is so you let the world be mean, don't fix it, and you be nice. It's not always possible. Sometimes you have to put boundaries to protect yourself. I get that, but as much as possible, you be the nice guy, let the world be the bad guy. That's what counselors do,
yeah.
and that's the formula that gets people to see it faster.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would require so much like personal strength because
Oh
if
my
you would,
gosh,
if
crazy amount. I feel like it's unfair. Even though I know it works, I feel like guilty. I'm like, I know I'm asking you to do something that's ridiculous and impossible, but it works.
um, where does where is the space for someone to be honest about how somebody else's behavior is affecting them? Because I feel like there's this idea of speak your truth without blame or judgment. But if I'm kind of stuck on the spouse thing. If you're, because that means that their behavior like it's all tied like financially, but it
Mhm,
also is tied to like household responsibilities, raising kids, but like the finances
mhm,
are really powerful. So if your spouse is, hungover, late for work, not performing well at work, that affects you financially, or, in terms of, being the primary caregiver for the kids, if they're not present to help. Like, what do you do with all that anger? Like, what is a good way to be honest without jeopardizing the safety that you're trying to create?
that's a super good question, and I like the way you started that with the whole, like, speak your truth,
Yeah.
which is the kinda like the common mantra today or whatever.
Yeah, but it's without blame or judgment because how easy it is to throw in a little hook in there.
Right, and I think it depends on what your goal is, right? If your goal is to get someone out of denial and to get someone through action, you need to think about whether or not speaking your truth is the effective way to make that happen. And oftentimes it is not. What you try to get them to do is you're trying to get them to speak their truth, because it's what they know, believe, and see that's going to get them to change. When you speak your truth, you're more apt to just make them defensive. Now, there is one circumstance that does work when you do that, and I'll tell you what that is. But before you do that, you need to realize, what is my goal here? Is it fair for me to have to hold that in? Absolutely not. But like I say on my channel, we talk about what works, not what's fair. This whole situation is unfair.
What works, not what's fair. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's okay. Go ahead.
It's totally
Sorry.
not fair for you to have to be the responsible one and be freaking nice about it and hold your tongue all the time. It is. It's just mean. It's beyond not fair. Like, I totally get that. But if you want to know what works, you have to create that safety. So,
Great safety.
People usually, even people that are like, I loved whatever. I love to get high. I'll never stop. I call it the big talk. I'll never go to treatment. The big talk, whatever. Even those people deep down inside, they do have some little rumblings of unhappiness about it, and there are things they don't like about it, and there are thoughts about change. And I see it as sort of my goal as a counselor, and hopefully I teach families to do this sometimes, is to sort of find those motivators that person has, and they're like little seeds, and water those seeds, because that's what's going to get that person to change. And no matter how much big talk they have, there is something inside of them that knows they need to change and wants to change. And if we just give it space, it can come forward. So, but it has to be their things, not your things. How does it make you feel? How's it impacting you? Because it's just, even if the person knows it's true, it's going to make them defensive. We're all like that. Yeah. Think about last time someone called you out on something and it's true. You still immediately feel defensive, even if you don't verbalize that in your own head. You're like, well, we're thinking it. So it's like a reflex.
It's like that Gloria Steinem quote that the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off.
Right. 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 It sure will.
There's. So I'm curious about the sort of like, how do we take care of ourselves in this role that we're sort of, it's like, okay, I want to do what works. It's not fair. How do we take care of ourselves? Like, I feel like that anger needs to be addressed somehow. Sounds like from what you're saying, you don't deal with the anger with the person that's creating it. What other ways can we take care of ourselves?
I mean, I think that there's all those sort of things that everyone says, get support, have your own counselor, have people that you talk to about it. But I will throw this in there. Don't make that person that you talk to about it, that your loved ones, family members, and friends. That is a bad idea. We could do a whole video on that. Don't do that. They need to be separate. Your own people, maybe your own counselor or your best friend or someone who gets it. So you have your own support for that. But honestly, I think the biggest thing that helps with that is that when you start interacting with that person differently, they may not stop their addiction right away immediately, but very, very quickly, almost immediately, they'll start interacting with you differently. And that makes your anger go down because they're less resentful and angry with you. And so they're less antagonistic with you. And they're more willing to align or help out or, even when they're not ready to address the addiction, if you're being nice to them, they're more likely to be nice to you back, which makes you less angry. So it kind of fuels itself once you get the momentum moving in the right way.
Yeah. When we were talking about the speak your truth without blame or judgment, I feel like and maybe I'm wrong about this because but you tell me. So saying things like if there is a negative consequence and you don't step in to try to fix it, and obviously the situation is present. Can you say something like, I feel really sad about that, and then just like leave it? Or
yeah, I think an empathy statement works the best. Like, let's say someone goes out and gets a DUI, and you're fuming mad about it because it's going to cost $10,000 because you've told them 5 million times because you offered to drive. You have a million reasons to feel mad about it. Totally valid, legit ones, right? But if you're like, oh my gosh, that really sucks. It's going to be a big pain in the ass. It's going to be a lot of money. You're going to have to do all this stuff. Then, because you're empathizing with them, it actually soothes the defensive part of their brain and it actually allows the learning part of the brain to activate. So, from like a brain science perspective, having that empathetic statement is going to get that person to think and learn and figure it out faster. Even though your inclination is to say, I've told you, blah, blah, like the whole thing.
Yeah, take your anger somewhere else. That is such a good point. You were saying earlier about not taking it to a family member.
Mhm.
What I have found, I work with a lot of women and, a lot of their source of stress is their relationship. And what I have found is that if you criticize the person that's causing the stress, it puts them in a position to defend the person that they're angry with.
That's right. That's
And
right.
so if you go to your mom about your husband getting a DUI, she's going to attack him and then you're going to have to defend him, which like
Yeah.
makes our feelings worse.
Right. It can work both ways. Like if you go to your own mom about it, then your mom is going to be so furious with your husband. And then when you forgive him, your mom's not going to forgive him.
Right? She's
Right.
gonna
And
forget.
now maybe your husband's trying to do better and you're trying to work it out. But now you've set up a situation where it's impossible because now your family won't even talk to you anymore because you're still with them. So there's that. And
Yeah.
then if you try to go to his mom's going to align against you
Yeah.
almost every time, unless that mom knew there was an addiction before you ever came along.
Sometimes they get sick of
His
it too.
family's going to align against you. Sometimes you
Yeah.
know that outwardly, and sometimes it's behind the scenes with some splitting and stuff. So,
Yeah.
and that I feel like that happens a lot, like especially when it's a couple, like you go to your in-laws thinking that you can get some support and help from them,
Yeah.
and that almost always backfires on you. So you have to
Yeah.
tread very, very lightly because the truth of it is that your addicted spouse is going to their family and friends and complaining about you nonstop. And they've already decided that you're the problem because that's what your loved one's been telling them. So when you start going and saying that, it's not gonna work good.
Especially if you've been working so hard to keep up the image that everything is fine.
Right.
Like
And
all
the
they
worst thing
see
could
is
happen is then they tell their son or whoever that you came and said that, now you're done for. Like that damage, I mean, sometimes it can be repaired and sometimes it can't. Like that's almost like the addicted person sees that as like a serious
betrayal.
betrayal,
Yeah.
and some people get over it and some people don't.
And that's really the insanity of addiction, right? Is that somehow the spout, like the sober person is the bad guy. Like you were talking about the bad guy role,
Mhm.
because we become passive aggressive, nagging. I wrote down some notes from your video, but we
Mhm.
become like the pestering, resentful. We're just always angry and bitter. And everybody sees that too. So it's like, and that's why they say it's a family disease because everybody gets sick. It's
Right.
contagious like a virus. It's not just the addiction, but it's the dynamics because, this is all a dance. So, yeah, it gets complicated really fast.
Right, because a family unit is supposed to function sort of as a team, and everybody plays different roles to contribute and make the team system work. But once you have addiction, what ends up happening is everybody starts moving into survival mode in 100 different directions. And we all have different coping and ways we're doing that, but we're all pulling away because of the chaos and the dynamics.
Yeah. Man, it gets messy.
It gets real messy.
I think that's why it's so nice to have somebody like you or a support person like me that can be objective.
Hmm.
Like, we don't have any history with the person who's trying to get sober. We don't have any, expectations. We don't have any kind of interdependency. It can just be solely focused in a safe environment on
Right.
what, what is the truth? What can we be honest with? Like, what are the facts?
Exactly. Kind of help us sort of wade through all the messy cloudiness and kind of get objective about it.
Man, it's so hard. I feel like the feelings are, cloud our perspective and
Of
it's hard
course,
to
right.
see. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that contributes to the denial. After decades in recovery, what I know for sure is simply having the right information isn't enough to create lasting change. Whether it's getting sober, losing weight, making more money, or finding love, taking consistent action is a requirement to getting results. That's why I'm developing a community through the Inner Compass program, because the quickest way to create lasting change is to overcome internal resistance, and the best way to do that is to surround yourself with a community of people who are committed to change. In the program, you will find the tools and practices to overcome internal resistance and others who are just like you, high achievers who have a desire to reach their highest potential. So if you are sick of repeating self-sabotaging behaviors, feeling discouraged and disappointed, then download a free journal exercise that will get you started on resolving internal resistance, and it will also get you on my email list so you will be the first to know when registration opens. Just visit innercompassprogram.com. Now, back to the show.
I did want to come back, Arlene, because I said earlier that there is one circumstance where you can share your truth that works really well. And I don't want to forget that because people are going to be like, she didn't say it.
Please. Yeah, you probably said it and I skipped right
I
over
didn't,
it.
and I know I forgot to do that. But if you get out of the bag I roll, I call it building credibility, trust and credibility. In our invisible intervention program, we actually have a way of tracking it, like building your credit score, like points, you build points. If you can build trust and credibility with this person and create a lot of safety with this person for a while, eventually that person starts to really care what you think. And not only that, but they feel like you really, truly get them and understand them. So it's two things. It's you get me, like you really understand my situation, and like I care what you think because you're an important person in my life. At that point, what you have to say holds a lot of power and influence. And at that moment, when you have a good enough credit score, you can speak your truth and the other person wants to make it better and fix it. Like they feel terrible that it's hurting you. They feel terrible that you're scared all the time, and they want to fix it. If you're speaking your truth and you've been in this resentment power struggle situation with them for a long time, not only do they not care, they might just do it more to make it worse because they're so mad at you. They're purposely, I call it like the I'll get drunk at you, sort of a backlash. So that's where you can speak your truth if you have built this type of situation where I can be honest with you because there's enough safety here for me to do that and for you to hear it.
Yeah, I feel like people really get it when they're on our side. I know when somebody is on my side
Mm-hmm.
and I can feel it as opposed to, and I think that's why sometimes it's easier to work with somebody that you don't have any history with because there's no resentment on both sides to sort of overcome.
Exactly.
No
Right.
dynamic to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like you said, it's we're talking about what works, not what's fair.
What works, not what's fair.
Yeah, I just feel like the person that's in the support role really needs their own support system. Like they need a safe place too.
Mm-hmm.
They need a safe place to go process their feelings and vent with somebody else. Because I feel like, I think it was Marianne Williamson who said that like the ego speaks first and the ego speaks loudest.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but when we can kind of vent through and process all that, then there's the truth that remains. And, the truth is often, I'm sad, I feel disconnected, and, all these things. But when you're talking to somebody and you're angry, venting that isn't productive.
It really just reinforces the anger.
It reinforces it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That goes
Mm-hmm.
back to we sort of are creating the circumstance that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. Sometimes even like journaling will help you sort through your thoughts and feelings and get clarity because it forces you into the thinking part of your brain to like literally, especially if you're handwriting, to think about the letters. You have to get into a different part of your brain to write the letters down to form the
Yeah.
sentences. that it helps you to process things differently and look at a situation much more objectively. Like a lot of people come to a lot of, like realizations and light bulb moments from doing that.
Yeah, no, journal, that's a great skill to have.
But make sure to lock it up, have it away, do not let it be found under any circumstances.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah, hide that stuff.
Yeah.
There's that book by Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. She talks about morning pages, and morning pages are 3 pages every day that you're, and that's a lot. I've tried to do it, and I have to be highly motivated.
I
But
don't
it's
think I have
so
the discipline
interesting.
for that. It's a good idea there.
Yeah, it's been around for like 30 years. Julia Cameron was married to Martin Scorsese.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and anyway, it's an amazing, but she's 12-step oriented, but it's all about um using creativity. But her biggest tool is the morning pages.
Hmm.
And I'm glad that you talked about journaling, because there is something when I've been able to do it, and it's not easy, and I would just say do as much as you can. But it's always like in the last page that I get some sort of epiphany.
Right.
Like there is a lot of like mental noise that if you just put it out on paper and empty your mind and your heart,
Mhm.
like the epiphany comes at like the third page.
It's like sorting through. It's kind of like if you're trying to sort through your junk drawer at home and you just dump it all out on the table, right? And it takes you a minute, it's just a big mess, and then you can figure out I don't need this, I do need this, like I can
Yeah.
put this over there, and then at the end you feel a lot more organized and collected in your
Yeah.
thoughts and in your feelings.
That's so good. That reminds me, like the outside is a reflection of the inside,
Hmm.
right? And when things are organized on the outside, it does bring us a level of inner peace. And at
Oh
the
yeah.
end of the day, is sort of that's kind of the goal of all the stuff that we talk about. If you're in a relationship with someone who's in denial, I think what we really want for ourselves and others is peace,
Hmm.
right? Like the chaos is so painful.
Hmm.
This whole thing of addiction is so painful. And when we're in pain, we try to overcompensate with action.
Right. If we try to rush it, I mean, even myself, when I mess it up, which I do plenty, it's
Mhm.
because I'm trying to rush it. And it's like
Yeah.
I especially am prone to doing that when I know that the family member's on their last leg, like literally one more time and the wife's gonna leave or the parent's cutting them off. I don't care what happens. And then I start feeling this like pressure on my end to fix it faster. And then I start pushing too fast. And then I end up making a mistake and then prolonging it.
Right.
It's like you want it to go faster. It's an impatience. We want them to see the problem faster, so we just want to tell them the answer, and it
Mhm.
really just slows it down.
Isn't that crazy that there's that military saying that slow is smooth and smooth is fast?
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to go slow. I think, our brains are designed, they're comfort seeking machines,
Mhm.
right? And, watching somebody struggle is so painful. And we do everything in our power to try to control it. But I love that old Al-Anon saying that you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it,
Right,
right? And as the more we try to do that, you're right, the longer it prolongs the solution.
right. It just really serves as a distraction for the person. They get caught up in, like I said, defending themselves and being mad at you. And the reason I know this is because, you know, for 20 something years, I've worked with people who have addictions, and when
Yeah.
their family members doing that, that's all the person can talk to me about, and I'm like, You might as well not come pay me big money to listen to your loved one complain about you because that is what that's what's gonna be happening if you're still in the bad guy role, like, we are not gonna even get to
Right.
touch this other
Mhm.
stuff. I mean, the person just that's all they can think about and talk about in session, and it's not until that gets better that I can get the person to start to deal with themselves
Wow.
and they're part of the situation. It's like that has to clear because it's such a distraction.
It's a distraction. That is huge. I
Mhm,
had a funny story as you were talking a couple of times. It's come up a couple of times where I had this friend who was married, and they were both sober, but she was getting resentful because he was doing so, what, he was in construction and he'd come
mhm,
home super dirty,
mhm.
and he would take off his socks, but the way he would take off his socks, he would leave them in a big dirty ball. You know,
Mhm.
like they take us and turn into, she's like, and she hated putting her hand inside to pull it out. And she asked him a bazillion times not to do that. And he kept
Mhm.
doing it. And so she decided, she told him, she was like, listen, I'm not going to do that anymore, just so you know. Like I've asked you a bazillion times, I'm not going to wash your socks if.
Mhm.
And so he kept doing it. And so she would just set his socks aside because she was feeling resentful.
Mhm.
And her mentor told her that if you keep nagging him and bitching at him, then he can point to you as you're the bitch.
Right.
But if you just let him suffer the consequences of his choices,
Right.
pretty soon he had no socks and he was like, I gotta go to work. Where are my socks? She's like, we talked about that. They're over there. In a
Right,
in a
exactly.
in
They're
a
in the pile where you left
they're in the
them.
pie.
Yeah. In my mind, when you said that, I almost picture having like this little basket that sits by the door. There you go. Like, and they're just like a pile of dirty socks in
A
it.
pile of dirty socks. But I
Right.
was thinking that was like a real tangible example of allowing somebody to suffer the consequences of their own choices. And how it's
Right.
like, yeah, she was like, yeah, I know that must suck for you. I know you got to go to work. You're probably gonna have to wear a pair of dirty socks.
Right, and if you think about
Sorry.
immediately, because I always see I feel like I call myself a defense attorney. I'm always like, get people out of trouble. That's what I do. But I start thinking about from the husband's point of view, what's he thinking? Here's the narrative. Here's what he would be telling his counselor in session. Okay. Some
Okay.
version of this, which is I work my ass off
Uh,
in the heat, in the cold,
in the
12,
dirt.
14 hours a day. I provide for this family, and she's just never freaking happy. She's just upset because my socks are dirty. What the hell? Like, that is what is going to be being told to the counselor. I promise you. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
This is why
Which
you're
is
so
quite
good, right?
accurate.
Because this is how you meet people where they're at is you can already know what they're thinking.
Yeah, of course. I mean, all you got to do is think if that was me, what would I be thinking? What would be my defensive thought?
Yeah.
That's the thought. It's like, dude, I work construction and you're complaining to me about some dirty socks and I've worked 12 hours a day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he's thinking. And so what do you
Mhm.
do in that case? Do you just empathize? Go, yeah, that must be really hard for you that you work really hard and she's not willing to wash her socks.
Well, what I would do in session is say, dude, you do work your ass off. I would say like, dude, I wouldn't want to do that work. I would start with some empathy and whatever.
Oh,
And I'd say, why do you think that upsets her so much? And then after that empathy, then I would start trying to ask questions that might make him think about where she's coming from. And then I might say something like, as a counselor, I might say something like, well, gosh, is she just like that about everything? Or is this just like a pet peeve of hers? And he might say, well, it's really just a pet peeve. She's not really like that about everything. And try to get them to start to see that maybe, from the other point of view. From if I'm the wife in the situation, if the wife would just come in and say something like, dude, you work your ass off. Like you work, I would not want to work in the conditions you work. Like I have so much respect for you. I gotta tell you, these dirty socks, they just kind of drive me crazy. I know, like it's me or whatever, but I'm gonna need you to do something about it, or else, like, here's the basket, you can put them in there. I'll let you deal with it. Then, then if you can see their side first, it's gonna take all that defensive awayness away, and the husband is very likely to be like, I know they're pretty nasty, like I totally get it. Like
yeah.
if you can see their side first, they're gonna see, they can hear what you're saying.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense, right? You're validating their feelings.
Right,
Yeah. So
right.
as a spouse, who's
Hmm.
maybe got a specific challenge with your
Hmm.
somebody who's drinking, you can be like, you can validate their feelings first, and then you can
Hmm.
get to the solution.
And you can even say, I know I'm nitpicky. You know me and my pet peeves. You know me and my control issues. If you say it kind of funny, and kind of make fun of yourself, they'll be like, I know. And then they don't have to think that. If you
Yeah.
don't say that, that's all they're thinking. Oh my God, you're so uptight. You have to go dang, it's all they're thinking.
It's funny. I kind of call that spiritual jujitsu.
That's exactly right. It is.
It
Right.
is. It's like spiritual jujitsu because the truth of the matter is that that's a very that's a humble that's practicing humility
Right.
is when we can recognize our own limitations and be like, yes, it's almost like what you were saying. It's like you can get into the mind of the person, like you already know what they're going to say.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can kind of put yourself in their shoes, like what is the thing that they're going to say? I'm sure we all have the same conversations over and over and over anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't people have like the same arguments?
Oh,
It's like,
yeah. Yeah.
you already know what he's going to say. So why not just put yourself in his shoes and validate it first
Right.
and then ask for what you need, maybe.
Exactly. They're just gonna be so much more likely to hear it. And I think it is
Yeah.
sort of two pieces. What's their point of view on it? And what is it defensively that they're going to think against you? You can even start out like, okay, I'm about to go crazy housewife on you, 5 minutes, I promise. And then it's over. And then you just say it. And then you kind of both laugh, but
Yeah.
you've spoken your truth, but you've done it with humility, right? And understanding from
Sure.
how you're coming across in their point of view, which allows them to feel safe enough to see it.
Yeah, I love that idea of humility and humor,
Mm-hmm.
kind of making light of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like when things are heavy, that does put us into our survival mode.
Yeah, it biologically puts you in a fight or flight response. Like inside, all of your biology starts screaming at you, and you can't really even control it once that happens.
That is such a good point. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of research on, brain chemistry, of course, psychology and all that stuff. And when we're afraid or when we feel attacked,
Yep.
we automatically defend. It happens so fast, we don't even realize it's happening. And it kicks off fear, which
Hmm.
lives in your amygdala in your brain.
Right.
And then that's when all your rational thought goes offline and you go
Right. And
into
you're
that
just from
fight
that
or
emotional fear place. Right. And you
yeah.
just reflexively, emotionally reacting to the situation. Like the socks example. I love this example because it's just so typical, right? Like we can
Yeah.
all kind of imagine
It's
ourselves on
very
one side
real.
or the other of this story. And this guy's thinking, gosh, I take those socks off at the door because you don't want me coming in with my muddy boots. Like I'm trying here,
Right.
he's thinking, what do you want from me? I'm doing that. And
Yeah.
so if we just acknowledge that, then they don't have to have that defensive thought because we already had it for them. We already get it.
Yeah.
We hear you. Yeah.
It kind of goes back to that idea is like we're always having the same fight.
Hmm.
And so, you know, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. So how can we do it different? And I love your solutions about putting yourself in their shoes, validate, um, humility and humor. These are all super practical, and I can see how they would work.
Right. And the person may not fix it immediately because some of it's just habit and they don't even realize they're doing it really because they're just automatically doing it.
Yeah.
But they'll definitely be receptive to hearing it. And if they do it again and you bring it up, they're like, oh yeah, my bad. I'm sorry. I didn't even think, they're just not defensive. They don't need to defend themselves because you've already defended them, and so they just don't
Aw.
need to bring that.
Yeah, you've already defined. That sort of brings up like a natural like question of like, okay, I'm going to do all these things. How long before they change?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's that's a very and I like what you said about these habits are so ingrained, they're subconscious. We're just like sometimes it's like when you drive to work, it's like you can just drive there and not
Yeah,
even realize how you got
automatically.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just automatic. So
Yeah.
I feel like allowing ourselves some grace as we try to change our skills because that does change the outcome.
Right. And realizing it's not personal. Because a lot of times, like if you're the wife in that situation, you're thinking, he has no respect for me. Like just cleaned all that up. It's so nasty. Like he has no
Yeah.
consideration or he doesn't care about me, which isn't true at all. It's really just an automatic
If
habit.
he would care about me, then he would do this.
If you would have any consideration for my feelings at all, but I'm a wife. I have these thoughts. We all have these. I'm not judging. I have them.
Yeah.
So we take it personal when it's not. It's still going to aggravate us when it happens, but we're going to be about mad level 2 or 3 as opposed to mad
Right.
level 10 when we think they're just inconsiderate, or they're just disrespectful, or they're just only care about themselves or whatever. When we're having those personalized thoughts, then we're our anger and resentment is through the roof rather than hovering around the frustration of annoyed level.
Yeah, for sure. I think when we can really put the focus on ourselves about how hard, like, so we're asking, I feel like we're talking to the wives or whatever, but like we're asking the people listening, the wives of or loved ones of somebody who's using, we're asking you to look at your behavior and change your behavior. And when we can sit with how hard that is for us to change,
Yeah.
we're not drinking or using or doing any of those things. We have all of our faculties and it's still super hard to change,
Right.
right?
Even when you want to,
When you
even when
want
you're
to,
fully aware and you're insightful and you know what the right answer is, you're still going to find that you fall back into old patterns sometimes, even when you're 100% committed and intentions are because you're a human being.
yeah, I've recently, I would say in the last few years, become obsessed with this idea of the default mode network. It's like your
Oh,
brain's
yeah.
operating system, right? And so we need to constantly work against it almost.
Hmm.
Um, and that's why, as somebody who has recovered, I recognize I have a default mode and that I do all these self-care practices so that I can move away from that default
Hmm.
mode. And everybody kind of gets the analogy like you wouldn't go to the gym once and expect to stay in shape forever. It's something you continually do. Or somebody even told me recently, like, you have to eat every day.
Hmm.
Like you can't just eat once and you're like, I'm done. It's like,
Right.
no, it's a practice. So all these things that we're suggesting are practices. And sometimes the best that we can do is make a mistake. And
Hmm.
so, to have a little bit of grace for the people who are not even, have that awareness that they're drinking and using is a problem.
Hmm.
But like we need to be patient with them too, because they don't actually want to change. But as we change, they actually have to change.
Right. Because it's a system and you can't change one piece without the other piece changing. That's right.
Yeah. Do you remember Terry Bradshaw was this, not the football guy, but there was that psychologist from, I think it was like the 70s or 80s. He had this analogy of like a baby mobile, right? It typically it sits on an axis and there's things hanging
Yeah,
dangling
he
from
calls
the
it like the
ends.
family roles and the mobile family mobile. Yeah, I know exactly
Yeah,
what you're talking about. Yeah, it's like an
yeah.
old
Okay.
school like treatment lesson almost. Yeah.
And it's so practical because everybody gets like the image of what a baby mobile looks like. But if one of them, if you tap one and it starts to move and change, all the rest of them have to move and change to compensate.
Right.
So really the challenge and the Jedi mind trick of this is we so want them to change, but the magic is when we change.
Right. What force, what change do I need to make that's gonna create that change in that other person? And it can get complicated because, it can feel like I'm saying it's your job to fix this or it's your job to control this, but the way I like to say it is you can have influence over it. You can't
Influence.
fix it, you can't control it, but you do have influence over it. And when you change your interaction style, it forces a change in the other people in the situation, just like the mobile, right?
Yeah, and I think there is confusion in what we're responsible for, right? Like,
Mhm.
I grew up in a dysfunctional family where we were responsible for each other and we were
Mhm.
not responsible for ourselves. Like, I had a sister who was mentally ill, and I tried to control her
Mhm.
and, and so I was taking responsibility for her. And
Mhm.
then when I ended up in the rooms of recovery, they helped me sort through what was mine and what wasn't. And when I
Mhm.
was able to let go of what wasn't mine, it helped me bear the weight of what was.
Right.
Because my responsibility is still heavy. It's still hard.
Mhm.
And that's why we have support, right? Because we need support to, go through those changes in
Especially,
behavior.
when we're trying to unwire, undefault network some of these, things we learned before we even have memory, like what you're talking about, like that are just so ingrained and automatic that we're doing them even not even aware that we're doing them, especially,
Yeah.
boundary issues like this that we learn that we don't even realize we're doing.
Yeah, we don't even realize it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think ultimately when we can recognize that we are responsible for our own peace and our own happiness, like we're making choices every day.
Mhm.
And so I feel like it's so much easier to have when I work with people who are typically hyper responsible because it seems like it's easier to back off of responsibility than it is to get somebody to assume responsibility.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, people that are listening who have somebody that they're really struggling with, just know that you're probably in the camp of the hyper responsible.
Yeah. The ones
And
that are listening, it's a sign that you're in that camp.
yeah, because you're listening for a solution, trying to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well, listen, this has been super helpful. Is there anything else that you want to share that I may have not neglected to ask or didn't see?
No, this is a fun conversation. I always love talking to you. You have so many good like metaphors and quotes, and you always want people. I'm like, wow, she's so smart. She could just like pull this and pull that. Like your memory is on point.
The girl for this and this only.
Well, it's impressive. I'm like, wow, she knows this person and this person and this one. I'm like, wow, she's on it.
Yeah, I'm a little obsessive when it comes to, you know, recovery.
It's working. Yeah, yeah,
Thanks.
I can see
Well,
it.
listen, I want everyone to check out your channel because if you are either yourself healing from addiction, chances are you know somebody else. You have somebody in your life who is also in the
Mhm.
same camp. And depending on where you are, maybe people aren't wrestling with addiction. Maybe they're wrestling with socks. I don't know.
Right. That's right.
Wherever, wherever you are on the spectrum, I just want I want to encourage people to check out your YouTube channel that is doing amazingly well. You have such a community. What's the name? I can see if
Yeah.
not everybody is going to be watching the YouTube, but what is the name of it?
It's called, Put the Shovel Down, and that's an old recovery saying that's you hit your bottom when you put your shovel down. Because we don't believe people have to wait till bottom. We think it's kinda silly to do that. So just put the shovel down, let's call this bottom and move on.
Yeah, I love that. So we're those of you who are just listening, I do have a YouTube channel, and in your background, you have a neon sign that says "Put the shovel down." That is
Yeah,
so
and some
cool.
people are like, "What does that mean?"
I know. You reach bottom when you quit digging.
Right, yeah, you can
Digging.
decide when that is.
Yeah,
Exactly.
put the shovel down. That's brilliant. Well, I will leave a link to the episode I referenced in the beginning but to your channel.
Well, thank you
I
so
highly
much.
recommend it. Yeah, I have found it so useful. And I love how you're able to put yourself in other people's shoes and meet people where they're at to
Mhm,
help them sort of think it all the way through with new information. I feel like recovery is so much about context and perspective.
mhm.
But first, we have to meet people where they're at. So you do a
Yeah, and if
brilliant
you
job of that.
even I know a lot of your viewers are people who are in early recovery, and they're battling their own thing. Even if that's you and maybe you have a family member who is driving you crazy or doesn't get it.
See?
You wanna
See?
send them over to the channel, and I will give you a hint about the way to do it, okay? Here's what not to do. Don't say, "You don't know how to support me and you're making things worse, you need to go watch Amber." Don't do that. Here's what you say. You say, "Oh my gosh, I found this, like, recovery YouTuber. She's, like, really smart. I've learned so much. You should like, I listened to this one video where she said, and it made me realize I was doing this. Like, what do you think?" And they're gonna run over there and watch
Run.
it.
They're gonna
If
break their ankles, run into the.
yeah. Right. So it's how do you set it up? How do you put yourself in their shoes, and sending them over there will help, it'll make your life so much better.
That's so brilliant. That's so good. That's why I had you back. That was amazing.
Well,
Well,
thank
listen,
you so
Ann,
much.
yeah, thank you so much for coming back. And I'll look forward to speaking with you again on your podcast.
That's right. You're gonna be on my, I don't know when the viewers are watching this, but you're gonna be on, not this week, but next week. And
Yeah.
you can even come over live and even ask you questions.
Ooh, that'll be fun. Yeah, I'm actually gonna release this episode this week because it's just so timely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
so
Yeah.
it'll be soon. Yay.
Yeah.
All right, my friend, it was so good to see you. We'll talk again real soon.
I'll talk soon. Bye.
One last thing before you go, you can follow the podcast on Instagram for daily inspiration at ODAT Podcast. And if you'd like to get a biweekly email from me with recommendations to books I'm reading, meditations I love, or other recovery podcasts, just sign up for it at odatchat.com. That's ODAAT chat.com. And if you do, I hope you enjoy it.